Jonas Hale came to a stop. His steel-gray eyes scanned the dense bushes lining the narrow trail. His horse shifted nervously, hooves tapping at the ground, as if sensing something was not right. Jonas gave the reins a slight tug and moved forward slowly. Amid the dry leaves, a frail Apache girl was curled up, her trembling hands clutching a torn piece of cloth. Her wide black eyes were filled with both fear and despair. Her stomach was sunken, and a faint whimper escaped her lips with each shallow breath. Jonas knelt down. He said nothing, just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of dry bread, placing it gently in front of her. At first, the child recoiled, but hunger forced her to reach out with a shaking hand. Even a small bite was enough to bring her to tears, a mix of sweat and sorrow streaking down her dirt-smudged face. "Go ahead and eat, little one." Jonas's voice was deep and hoarse, thick with emotion. He lifted the child into his arms. Her body was light as a bundle of dry sticks and burning hot with fever. Jonas held her close, glanced quickly around, then turned toward his cabin. Night fell, and the mountains sank into a thick blanket of darkness. The only light came from the flickering flames inside Jonas Hale's cabin fireplace, casting shadows across the small wooden room. On the rough wooden bed, the Apache child lay still, her breathing slowly becoming steadier after eating and being wrapped in a blanket. Jonas sat in the wooden chair beside her, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the child. It had been many years since this house last held the soft breathing of a child. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed just outside the door. Jonas froze. His old scout instincts kicked in at once. He reached for the Colt revolver resting on the table and stepped toward the door. The night wind crept through the narrow cracks, carrying with it the distant scent of smoke and the sound of footsteps, light and cautious. When Jonas pushed open the door, the figure of a tall woman appeared under the moonlight. Her frame was strong, her thick black hair tangled and wild, and her eyes as dark as burning coal. A scar still marked her shoulder, and her body was barely covered by a tattered hide dress. She stood tall, gripping a bone knife in her hand. Her voice was rough but rang with strength. "Where is the child?" Jonas did not flinch. His gaze remained calm and cold. "She is sleeping. If you are her mother, then come inside." The woman stepped in. Her eyes instantly welled up when she saw the little girl on the bed. She dropped to her knees beside her daughter, whispering through trembling sobs, "Ahyoka." Jonas watched in silence. He realized he was standing before a soul both fierce and broken. The woman turned to face him, her eyes meeting his proud, yet uncertain. "I am Nara, the girl's mother. According to Apache tradition, because you saved my daughter, this body now belongs to you." The room fell into a tense silence. Jonas hesitated, his hand tightening unconsciously around the grip of his gun, unsure how to respond. A part of him wanted to refuse. He had no use for such an obligation. But when he looked into Nara's eyes, he saw more than submission. He saw a plea to be protected, a longing simply to exist. Jonas took a long breath, then said softly, "Stay here, both of you. I do not want a body given to me. I only want the child to live." Nara said nothing. Her large hand gripped her daughter's tightly, but her eyes shifted, uncertain. For the first time, a man did not see her as an object, or a tool, but simply as a human being. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, and in that small cabin, an invisible thread began to weave between three strangers, linking their fates in a way none of them could yet understand. On the first morning, pale sunlight filtered through the dusty wooden window, casting a soft glow on Ahyoka's pale face. The little girl shifted beneath the blanket, her lips moving slightly as if caught in a dream. Nara sat beside her, her large, calloused hand gently brushing the tangled hair away from her daughter's forehead. The deep black eyes that had been so fierce the night before now held only exhaustion and weariness. Jonas Hale stood on the porch, holding a mug of hot coffee in one hand, his eyes scanning the field of sun-scorched grass, yellowed by drought. It had been a long time since his home echoed with voices, with breathing that was not his own. But Nara's presence stirred something inside him, unease. Yes, but also a strange, quiet urge to protect. That entire morning, the small cabin carried an unfamiliar energy. Jonas worked outside near the cattle shed, repairing the fence, but his eyes often flicked toward the doorway. Inside, Nara was struggling to get the fire going. Her strong hands, used to gripping weapons and surviving battles, fumbled awkwardly with the ladle and the burning coals. but she was patient and determined not to become a burden. When Jonas stepped back inside, thick smoke from the hearth made him wince slightly. On the table sat a pot of porridge, thick and burnt, the smell clinging to every corner of the room. Nara turned to him, eyes hard, almost daring him to mock her. But Jonas simply tapped the table, pulled the pot closer, added some water, stirred it slowly, and set it back over the fire. He said nothing, just held her gaze for a long moment. Nara looked down, and for the first time in many years, a sting rose behind her nose. By late afternoon, Ahioka had fully awakened. Her soft laughter rang through the cabin as she tapped her spoon against the bowl. This wooden house, once filled with only the howl of wind and a heavy silence, now held small, warm sounds of life. Jonas sat across from them, watching mother and child eat, and deep inside, he felt something begin to fill a long empty space. That night, he laid out extra blankets for the two of them. As he placed the thick cover over Nara's shoulders, he heard her whisper, very softly, "Even this body I do not need to give it. I only want my daughter to live well." Jonas paused. His steel-gray eyes remained quiet. He did not answer. He simply turned and stepped out onto the porch, lighting a cigarette. But in his heart, he knew something had begun to shift. Out there, the sky blazed red with the late sunset, and inside that lonely wooden cabin, life was beginning to flicker again for the first time in many cold, silent years. 3 days later, life at the cabin seemed to be settling into a fragile peace. Jonas worked on fixing the dry well, Nara kept the fire going, and Ahioka skipped around gathering small twigs. A rare sense of simplicity had fallen over a place once ruled only by wind and the chirping of insects. But out here on the prairie, peace was always just a thin layer. That morning, as Jonas led his horse out to graze, he noticed fresh hoofprints in the dry dirt. 3 horses, heavy boot tracks, deeply pressed. He crouched down, brushing the dust with his fingers. The old scout in him knew right away. These were not cavalry. Traders, maybe. Or bounty hunters. Jonas returned to the cabin, his face heavy with thought. Nara looked up, her dark eyes instantly wary. In his silence, she read something she had known all too well. Trouble was near. "They have found me," she said hoarsely, her large hand tightening around the dagger strapped to her hip. Jonas did not deny it. He opened the cabinet, pulled out the dust-covered Winchester rifle. The sharp sound of the bolt slamming into place silenced the room. Ahioka looked on, confused, not yet understanding. That afternoon, 3 men appeared at the bottom of the hill. One of them, thick-bearded and wearing a fur-lined coat, stepped forward. He grinned, voice lazy and taunting. "We heard Mr. Hale here's been keeping something that got lost from the trading post. We are just here to take it back. Name your price. Easy deal." Jonas stood on the porch, his gray eyes cold as stone. "Get out. There is no cargo here." The man chuckled, tapping the butt of his pistol. "Do not make us come in there and drag it out." Inside the cabin, Nara stood close to her daughter, eyes blazing. Jonas subtly raised his hand behind him, signaling her to stay calm. Then he raised the Winchester. The barrel glinted cold under the fading Sunday. "One more step, and you will bury your bones in this land." The air turned thick, one wrong move, and blood would spill. Finally, the men spat on the ground and turned their horses, riding off in a swirl of red dust. But one of them looked back and sneered. "Fine, Hale. Keep your little savage, but you will regret it." The dust cloud faded into the distance, leaving a heavy silence. Jonas lowered the rifle, but his eyes stayed locked on the horizon, sharp with tension. He knew this was only the beginning. As the twilight deepened, Nara stepped up beside him. Her voice was low, trembling slightly. "They will come back, and they will not let you rest." Jonas nodded, his steel-gray gaze fixed on the blood-red horizon. Deep inside, he knew. From this moment on, every path he and she walked would be tied together through fire and through blood. "I truly appreciate having you here. And if this story brought back memories of red, dusty evenings and the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, subscribe to my channel. So each day, we can sit together once more. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West." 3 days after the confrontation, the Arizona sky darkened with storm clouds, and the wind swept up red dust like a warning from the land itself. Jonas had reinforced the windows and stacked extra sandbags in front of the porch. Nara sharpened her blade, the fire in her black eyes burning fierce and bright. Ahyoka was placed in the small crawl space beneath the floor, wrapped in a warm blanket with a flask of water by her side. "Do not come up unless I call for you," Jonas said, his voice hoarse but steady. The little girl nodded, her wide eyes glistening, clutching the wooden doll her mother had whittled just the day before. The sound of pounding hooves thundered from afar, like storms striking the earth. Jonas gripped his Winchester tighter. More than a dozen riders emerged through the dust, led by the same bearded man from before, now astride a massive horse with a whip hanging at his side. He shouted, "Jonas Hale, do not think you can hide her forever. Bring the woman out and we will spare your life. Otherwise, this cabin will burn." Jonas stepped out onto the porch, tall and lean like a weathered pillar. His steel gaze swept across the men. For a moment, the wind lifted his old leather coat, revealing the hardened chest of a man who had seen war and lived through it. "You came looking for blood? Then do not expect to leave this place alive." The sharp click of a loaded rifle broke the silence. Nara stood just behind him, gripping her wooden bow, the arrow tip wrapped in cloth and ready to burn. In that moment, two fates, a rancher who had lost everything and an outcast Apache woman, became one. The men split into two groups, one circling to the rear, the other charging straight ahead. Jonas fired first. The bullet tore through the wind, striking the lead rider in the shoulder and knocking him off his horse. His scream sent the other horses into chaos. The bearded man cursed, cracking his whip and urging the others forward. Nara's flaming arrow shot out, embedding in the bundle of dry hay they had tied as kindling fire exploded, throwing the attackers into further disarray. Within moments, the red prairie turned into a pocket of hell. Gunfire, horses screaming, fire and smoke and dust everywhere. Jonas reloaded in a blur, each shot finding its mark, dropping 3 or 4 men in rapid succession. Nara was just as fierce, moving like a shadow through the cabin, throwing knives and loosing arrows with unwavering precision. At last, the attackers fled in chaos, leaving behind blood-streaked trails and a few fallen horses. The bearded man looked back, hatred and fear twisted in his eyes as he shouted, "This is not over, Hale." As the smoke cleared, Jonas leaned against the porch beam, breathing hard. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes burned bright. Nara stepped outside, blood streaking her cheek, the depths of her black eyes glowing with quiet pride. No words were needed. They simply exchanged a long look. And in that moment, an invisible bond sealed their fates together, through whatever storms might come. Night fell, and the prairie sank into a silence so deep it was almost haunting. After the confrontation, the air around the cabin hung heavy, thick with the lingering scent of smoke and the whine of wind through dry grass. Jonas sat on the porch steps, the Winchester resting across his knees. The firelight from a small pile of burning wood cast shadows across his hollow, rugged face. From inside the cabin, Nara stepped out, her tangled black hair falling over her broad shoulders. Dried blood still marked her cheek, but her eyes burned bright, full of life. She sat down beside him. Her large, calloused hands trembled slightly as they rested on her knees. Jonas glanced over, then silently handed her the water flask. Nara took a long sip, her breath heavy, as if trying to exhale the tension of the entire day. "They must hate us deeply by now." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I know," Jonas replied simply. He took a slow drag from his cigarette, the bluish smoke curling into the wind and vanishing into the dark. A long silence settled between them. Then Nara turned to him, her deep black eyes locked onto his. "You could have told us to leave, sent us away to avoid trouble. But you didn't." "Why?" Jonas stayed quiet for a while. His steel-gray eyes stared out at the blackened field, where moonlight drew pale silver lines across the cracked earth. "I lost everything once. My wife, a child that never got the chance to be born. All I had left was this house, and the silence that came with it. I cannot watch another soul fade away in front of me. Not again." Nara's hands clenched, her lips trembling. She had never expected a man to speak to her like this. "I cannot promise you peace," she said, her voice low but steady. "But I swear this, my daughter and I will fight beside you, until our last breath." Jonas turned to face her. Their eyes met. In that moment, no sweet words were needed, no kiss exchanged. But something deeper than love formed between them, a silent vow, witnessed only by the stars and the endless night. Inside the cabin, Ahioka stirred softly in her sleep, her breathing calm and even. Outside, the cold wind howled through the wooden fence. But on the porch, two figures sat side by side, quiet, steady, unbroken. That night, in the heart of danger and darkness, they found something both had long thought lost: faith. Before the sun could rise, the prairie trembled under the thunder of hooves. Jonas sprang to his feet, Winchester already in hand. Nara stood beside him, bow drawn tight, her black eyes gleaming. On the hillside, a swarm of horsemen charged forward, more than 20 riders, their dust-covered shirts clinging to them, tattered flags flapping wildly in the wind. At the head rode the bearded man, his face now twisted with hatred. "Hail!" he roared. "Today you pay." The first gunshot tore through the dawn. Jonas returned fire, his bullet kicking up dirt as it grazed the man's side. Nara sprang into action, her arrow plunging into a pile of straw they had stacked to burn the cabin. The fire roared to life, sowing chaos among the attackers. The horsemen split into two flanks, storming the cabin like a pack of wolves. The battle descended into chaos, gunfire crackled, horses screamed, smoke curled into the air, wrapping the fighters in a blinding haze. Jonas picked off several men with pinpoint shots, while Nara moved like a shadow through the madness, hurling blades and firing arrows without missing a beat. Shoulder to shoulder, they fought like a pair forged in fire and war. Then, just as it seemed the battle might spiral out of control, a sharp bugle call pierced the air from beyond the ridge. The horsemen froze, as if held by some invisible force. Through the dust, a squad of soldiers appeared, wearing blue-gray uniforms, not raiders, but federal troops, their flags and badges clearly marked, rifles gleaming in the light. The soldiers fanned out into a bayonet formation, cutting off any path of retreat. The officer stepped forward, his voice booming like thunder. "Stand down. By federal order, you are under arrest for human trafficking and armed robbery." The bearded man's eyes bulged. He raised his gun in a final act of defiance. A warning shot cracked through the air, and within seconds, soldiers closed in, pinning him to the ground. Others were yanked from their saddles, tied down with thick rope. The traffickers flailed and shouted, caught off guard by the speed and discipline of the troops. Amid the chaos screams, the cries of horses, Jonas and Nara stood, breathing heavily. Nara glanced at the soldiers, then back at Jonas, her eyes glassy with emotion, a tired smile forming on her lips. They had stopped a disaster, and justice had arrived just in time. The officer approached, eyeing the burn on Nara's shoulder and the child sleeping inside the cabin. He gave a solemn nod. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. We have been tracking these men for a long time. Someone tipped us off, and the trail led straight here. You did well. You held the ground until we could arrive." One of the soldiers stepped forward, handing Jonas a packet of documents, arrest warrants, written orders, a clear sign that what he had done was now backed by the law. The traffickers, now shackled and being led away, screamed threats of revenge. But the power they once held was gone. As the gun smoke faded, morning light pierced through the scattered ashes and bullet holes. Jonas placed a hand on Nara's shoulder, his voice low but firm. "They are here." Nara turned to him, her black eyes soft, and whispered, "We survived. Together." They both smiled. The sound of hoofbeats grew distant as the traffickers were escorted away under federal guard, and the cabin returned to silence once more. The Arizona sun rose slowly, casting a warm golden light across the prairie, still marked by hoofprints and the faint scent of gunpowder. Jonas Hale's small cabin still stood, its wooden walls scarred by bullets, but the porch glowed with the warmth of an early fire and the quiet murmur of voices. Nara stepped outside, her broad shoulders wrapped in a rough cloth, her sun-kissed face bearing the marks of battle, but in the deep black of her eyes, for the first time, there was a flicker of peace. Ahioka came running from inside, clutching her wooden doll, her bright laughter tearing through the last traces of tension in the air. Jonas sat on the porch steps, his cowboy hat resting on his knee, watching the scene as if it were a dream. For years, this house had known only howling wind and aching silence. Now it echoed with laughter and the breath of a new family. In the smoky kitchen, Nara clumsily stirred a pot of porridge. Jonas stepped in, gently lifted the spoon from her hands, stirred it evenly, then set it back down. Their eyes met, simple, quiet, but enough to warm both their hearts. Outside, the federal soldiers had already ridden off, taking the traffickers far away. Justice had been served, and Jonas was no longer a lone rancher standing against the world. He had allies, but more importantly, he had a family. That night, as the wind softened across the fields, Jonas sat on the porch, Nara beside him, Ahioka sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Jonas gently placed his hand over Nara's large, trembling hands. "From now on," he said softly, "this is our home." Nara said nothing. Her eyes shimmered beneath the moonlight, and for the first time, her lips curved into a true smile. That cabin, once a symbol of loneliness, had become the birthplace of something new. No wedding, no papers, just blood, sweat, and faith binding them together. The spring sun rose, golden over the prairie, lighting up the three figures on the porch. And from that place, a new story began. A story of love, of healing, and of a home built by two souls who had once lost everything. Dear friends, out here on the open prairie, bullets may keep you alive, but only love and home can keep your heart. A cowboy can ride alone for a lifetime, but when he finds a family to come home to, that is the greatest victory of all. It has been an honor to walk this journey with you. May peace and happiness follow you, wherever you are. I love you all, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. A blizzard swept across the Colorado mountains, like it was ready to swallow everything whole. Elias Ward sat by the fire holding a cup of cold coffee, when he suddenly jumped at the sound of knocking. 3 knocks, soft and shaky. Elias frowned. Who in the world would be outside in the middle of a storm like this? He grabbed his rifle, walked to the door, and cracked it open. A blast of freezing wind rushed in, carrying snow and 3 figures shivering in the whiteout. 3 Apache women. Their clothes were torn and tattered. Their black hair clung to their faces. Their bare feet were bluish and crusted with dried blood. Their faces were hollow, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The oldest one, tall and sturdy, stood as straight as she could, her voice rough and raspy. "Please, let us come into your house to get warm. We have not eaten in days. Everyone has turned us away and abandoned us." Elias stood frozen. The firelight flickered across his face, a face that had known loss, and now stared straight into someone else's misery. Part of him wanted to shut the door, to stay alone in the solitude he knew so well. But then he saw the eyes of the youngest girl wild, terrified, and starving, and his hand trembled. He opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in." The 3 figures stumbled in. When the door shut behind them, the howling storm seemed to be locked outside. And inside the cabin, all that remained was the shaky breath of souls trying to cling to their last bit of warmth in a merciless winter. The fire in the stove crackled back to life, pushing away some of the cold that had been gnawing at the wooden cabin. Elias tossed in a large log. The flames caught quickly, casting a warm golden glow on the pale, dirt-smeared faces of the 3 Apache women. The oldest one, whose name Elias would later learn was Sila, sat closest to the stove. She removed her wet blanket and gently helped her younger sisters settle in. The middle one, Nara, was trembling all over, her lips dark purple. The youngest, Taya, was so small and frail that every breath she took sounded like a sigh from the edge of death. Elias poured hot water and set down an old iron pot in front of them. Inside, he stirred what little he had left, some stewed beans and broken bits of cornbread. It was the same meal he had been stretching for himself all winter. The 3 women stared at it, as if they could not believe it was real. Sila whispered something in Apache. When Elias nodded, they began to eat quickly, with shaking hands, as if afraid the food might vanish before it reached their lips. He sat across from them in silence, holding his cup of coffee, watching. It had been a long time since this cabin felt alive. No longer just the wind, now there were breaths, the clink of spoons against the pot, and the soft hiss of the fire. When they finished eating, Elias stood and brought out 2 thick blankets from the bedroom. He gently laid them across their shoulders. "Stay the night. We will figure things out in the morning." Selah looked up at him, her eyes strong, but tired. "We will leave early. We do not want to bother you, but thank you for not closing the door." Elias said nothing. He had just noticed the dark bruises on her wrists as she pushed her sister's hair back. Rope burns. He stood still, realizing they had not only been starving, they had been abused. As Taya drifted to sleep beside the stove, Nara spoke in a choked voice. Our tribe cast us out. They said my sister brings bad luck. When the soldiers came, many people died, and they blamed us. Elias stayed silent. Outside, the blizzard was still howling, but inside him, a different sound had awakened, the sound of compassion. Something buried since the day he lost his wife and child. He stood, added more wood to the fire, then spoke softly, his voice dry and rough like old timber. Stay. Leave when the skies are clear. Selah looked at him for a long time, then nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. That night, Elias lay on the long bench, listening to the steady breathing of the three strangers sleeping by the fire. The wind still howled outside, but for the first time in years, it no longer sounded lonely. The next morning, the sky was still a dull gray, and the snow had piled up all the way to the fence. Elias opened the door, and a blast of cold air hit him, making him pull his collar tight around his neck. He had planned to wake the three strangers and send them on their way before the blizzard returned. The small cabin did not have enough food for 4 people, and Elias was not used to having anyone else in his world. But as he approached the stove, Elias froze. The youngest, Taya, was curled up on the floor, her body trembling violently. Her face was flushed red, and her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. Elias gently touched her forehead. It was burning hot. She has a fever, he said softly, looking over at Selah. The eldest sister looked up, her eyes filled with both fear and desperation. Please, let us stay a few more days, just until my sister gets better. Elias looked at the 3 faces in front of him, starving, exhausted, but still holding on to their dignity. He let out a long sigh and set his rifle down. All right, but you will have to help me out. From that day on, the once silent cabin began to echo with footsteps, soft laughter, and the presence of life. Nara, the middle sister, took over the cooking. Even with nothing more than dried beans, a little cornmeal, and spring water, she managed to make meals that smelled of wood smoke and made Elias enjoy eating again for the first time in years. Selah helped him outside chopping firewood, fixing up the horse stall. Her hands were rough but steady, every swing of the axe firm and confident, like someone who had spent her life in the wilderness. Elias was quietly surprised to see a woman handle hard labor as well as he did. Taya remained feverish, and Nara stayed by her side, tucking her in and helping her drink water. Elias kept a pot of warm water by the bed, and every time she coughed, he would get up and add more wood to the fire. As the day faded, the 3 sisters sat by the stove. Nara gently taught Taya a quiet Apache song, while Elias sat sharpening his knife, silently listening. The singing was faint but sweet, blending with the howling wind outside, creating a sound the cabin had never known before, the sound of life. When night came, Selah tucked blankets around her sisters, then turned to Elias and spoke softly. We will leave when the storm clears. I promise. Elias replied simply. No need to rush, just get better. The firelight danced across their faces, 3 women who had once been cast out, now sheltered in the home of a lonely man. And in that quiet exchange of glances, something began to change slowly, but deeply. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, rising in long wails like the cries of a pack of wolves. Inside the small cabin, firelight danced across the wooden walls, illuminating the faces of 4 people sitting in a circle around the stove. It had been 3 days since Taya's fever broke. No longer gripped by fear, she leaned against Nara's shoulder, a faint smile on her lips as she listened to the crackle of burning wood. Elias sat nearby, slowly sharpening a small knife. No one spoke. But the silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. It was Selah who broke that silence. We used to live south of the mountains, she said, her voice raspy, her eyes fixed on the fire. My tribe was caught between settlers and soldiers. One night, they came, burned everything. My parents were shot. They did not make it out in time. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She paused, taking a deep breath, her voice catching in her throat. They said I was cursed, that I should not have survived. We were cast out of the camp. Since then, we just kept walking, eating roots, sleeping in the snow. Nara lowered her head, and Taya gripped her sister's hand. Elias set the knife down and looked at her. The firelight reflected in his gray eyes a gaze deep and heavy with memory. "I understand," he said softly. "I lost everything too. It was the sickness. My 2 little ones died in a single week. And my wife, she could not bear it. She followed them soon after." No one spoke again, only the wind outside and the quiet pop of the fire. But in that silence, something shifted understanding. Nara placed her hand on the pot of beans, stirring gently, her voice calm. "We did not think there was anyone left out there who knew what that felt like." Elias looked at her and nodded. "There are too many people in the world who think pain makes you weak. But in truth, only those who survive it know what real strength is." Those words made Sila lift her head. The firelight caught the depth of her dark eyes. And in that moment, she saw something she had not felt in a long time: trust. They sat like that through the night. No more stories. No need for comfort. But when Sila looked across at Elias, between 2 people the world had once cast aside, something invisible had formed in the quiet, a bond. "I am truly grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and hoofbeats echoing in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so every day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another tale from the West." On the 4th night, the sky darkened all at once. The wind howled through the mountains like the cry of a wounded beast. Blasts of snow began hammering against the cabin walls, dragging in a cold that cut straight to the bone. Elias looked up from his work table. The fire in the stove flickered weakly, a sure sign that a real storm was coming. He stood up, threw on a heavy coat, and called out sharply, "Sila, help me brace the door. If this wind gets any stronger, the walls will tear apart." Sila said nothing, just stood up and pulled on her cloak. The 2 of them rushed out to the porch, snow lashing at their faces like tiny knives. The barn door banged wildly in the wind. They fought to hold it, tying it down with ropes and nailing in boards. The wind was so fierce, every step took their full strength. Nara and Taya ran out from inside, trying to shield a flickering oil lamp. The dim yellow light shook in the storm as snow clung to their hair and their breath turned to smoke. "Over here! Hurry!" Elias shouted. A thunderous crack. A board from the east wall broke loose. Sila lunged forward, joining Elias to lift it back into place. In a split second, their hands pressed together on the heavy timber beam, shoulder to shoulder. Their skin was freezing, but where their hands met, a strange warmth surged up in the heart of the storm. They worked non-stop for over an hour. When the last door was finally secured, Sila collapsed onto the porch, her breath pouring out in thick clouds. Elias reached out and helped her up. "Are you all right? I used to think I would die in the snow," she said, her voice hoarse, her lips tinted purple from the cold. "But not now." They looked at each other for a long moment. The wind still roared around them, but the cabin stood strong. Back inside, Nara added more wood to the fire, and Taya poured hot water into cups. Elias sat down beside the stove, his eyes quietly following Sela as she wiped frozen droplets from her hair. She looked up and met his gaze. In that brief moment, there were no strangers, no caution, only 2 souls who had once been alone, now finding one another in the heart of a brutal winter. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the warmth was stronger than it had ever been. And when Sela reached out to add another log to the fire, Elias's hand brushed against hers once more. This time, neither of them pulled away. The next morning, the storm had passed. For the first time in days, the sun peeked out, laying golden streaks across the thick, cotton-like snow. The air was so still, you could hear the drip of melting water from the cabin roof. Elias stepped onto the porch, his breath rising in mist, one hand resting on the doorframe. The world around him was blanketed in pure white, as if the storm had never come, but its traces remained: tilted fences, a few missing boards, and a layer of frost shimmering on the barn. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed. Sila stepped out, wearing one of Elias's heavy coats. Her dark hair shimmered in the morning light. She gazed out at the wide expanse of snow, her voice low, light as the breeze. "I did not think we would make it through the night." Elias let out a rare smile, one that softened a face weathered by sun and wind. "Every storm passes. You just have to keep the fire burning." That made Sila turn to look at him, the fire not just in the stove, but within them, that warmth slowly pushing back the long years of solitude. Nara and Taya came out too, their cheeks pink from the sundae. They laughed as the chickens cautiously stepped out of the coop, shivering. Their laughter drifted into the air like a sign winter was fading. In the days that followed, life inside the cabin began to change. Nara started tidying things up, laying cloth back on the table, and hanging bunches of dried herbs by the window for scent. Taya helped Elias care for the horses, sometimes humming old tribal songs as she worked. Sila and Elias repaired the barn roof together. They worked side by side, often silent, yet always understanding. Once, when Sila slipped, Elias caught her with his rough but steady hands. She only managed a quiet, "Thank you," then turned away to hide her smile. At night, the four of them sat around the table for supper. Elias spoke little, just nodded when Nara offered more food. The cabin no longer echoed only with wind, but with the soft clink of spoons, quiet laughter, and the crackling of fire. One evening, after Taya had fallen asleep in a chair, Sela stayed by the fire, watching the flames. "We used to believe there was no place left for us in this world," Elias answered, his voice low. "There is. You just have to walk through a lot of cold to find it." Outside, the snow was melting slowly, and inside that small wooden cabin in the forest, something had started to grow peaceful, simple, and so real that even the wind seemed to pause and listen. The snow slowly melted, revealing patches of damp brown earth and a small stream trickling through the field. The early spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and the quiet promise of hope. Elias and the three sisters began rebuilding the farm. Sila and Elias chopped wood and added a small room to the side of the cabin, a silent sign that they were no longer just guests. Nara planted beans in the freshly turned soil, and Taya watered the garden and tended to the scraggly chickens that had made it through the winter. Laughter, the clucking of hens, the rhythmic sound of hammering all blended together, bringing life back to the land. But then, one early morning, just as the sun crested the horizon, the sound of hooves echoed from a distance. Elias looked up. Sunlight glinted off the wooden fence as 5 riders approached. At the front was the mayor of Pine Creek, along with several townsfolk. Their faces were hard as iron. The mayor pulled his horse to a stop at the gate, casting a cold, contemptuous glance toward the 3 Apache women standing near the garden bed. "Ward," he called out, loud and sharp, "we heard you have been harboring savages on your land. There is no place for them here. They need to leave. Now." The air froze. Nara stepped back, and Taya grabbed her sister's hand. Sila stood tall, fire in her eyes, but silent. Elias stepped forward and placed his weathered hand on the fence. His voice was calm, low, and clear. "They are not strangers. They are my family." A ripple of whispers stirred among the riders. The mayor scowled. "Family? Have you lost your mind? They are Apache." Elias did not flinch. "I know, but they saved this farm from the cold. They work. They bring warmth. If someone has to leave, then I leave with them." The group stiffened. No one had expected the lone rancher to stand up against the town's decree. Selah looked at him, surprised, and in her eyes, something deeper began to take root. Complete trust. The mayor cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "If you want to keep them, fine. But Pine Creek does not feed idlers. Make the land live again. Plant, raise livestock, harvest something, one season. If it works, they can stay. If it fails, they go." Elias nodded, his eyes hard as stone. "One season. That is enough." As the riders turned and the dust of their departure hung in the air, Sila stepped closer and asked quietly, "Why did you say that? Are you not afraid they will come back?" Elias answered, his voice rough as the night wind. "No one has the right to drive my family from their home." Nara broke into tears. Taya held her tight. Sila stood still, looking at Elias for a long time. Then, she gave a quiet nod. The 4 of them turned back toward the farm, where dry earth and cold wind waited for them. But this time, they would plant something more than seeds. They would plant trust and the will to survive. That April, Pine Creek had never seen a spring so full of hope. Warm winds swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of fresh soil, wet wood, and the scattered laughter from a small farm where 4 people were turning ruin into life. Elias rose before the morning mist cleared, calloused hands gripping the hoe. He and Sila worked tirelessly, digging irrigation trenches, setting fence posts for the cattle, and sealing every leak in the barn roof. Each hammer strike, each drop of sweat, felt like a vow to breathe life back into the land that once stood silent. Sila, in an old patched leather dress, moved like a warrior. She hauled water, carried straw, her sun-tanned shoulders flexing under the sky. When Elias tried to help, she just smiled. "I used to climb mountains to hunt. This is easier." Elias said nothing, but the warmth in his eyes spoke louder than words. Nara and Taya rebuilt the vegetable garden, planting corn, beans, and squash. At night, they lit fires and sang old Apache songs. Their voices blended with Elias's harmonica, drifting across the prairie like a prayer. Day by day, green returned. Sprouts broke through dry cracks. The barn echoed with the lowing of cattle again, and the stream down the hill flowed clear, reflecting their growing smiles. One morning, with the golden sun spilling across the fields, riders appeared once again from Pine Creek. The mayor and the townsfolk stopped at the gate, surveying the land. It was no longer dead. Before them stood a living farm, corn as high as a man's shoulder, barns full of livestock, and chimney smoke curling up from the cabin roof. Elias stepped out, holding his hat, his work shirt stained with soil. Beside him stood Selah, proud and steady, with her sisters glowing in the sunlight. The mayor remained silent for a long time, then exhaled deeply. "I cannot believe it. You actually did it," Elias replied simply. "Not me. All of us." Murmurs stirred among the crowd. Their expressions softened. One man tipped his hat. Another tossed a handful of seeds onto the earth, an unspoken sign of acceptance. The mayor gave a small nod, then turned his horse. "They have the right to stay. Pine Creek needs people like them." Once they were gone, Selah looked at Elias, pressing her lips together to hold back emotion. "So, now we are allowed to live." Elias smiled a full, honest smile, the first in many years. Not just live together. That evening, they shared their first meal grown from their own hands. The breeze carried the scent of fresh corn, smoke rose above the roof, and in the glow of sunset, Elias, Sila, Nara, and Taya sat side by side. No one said a word. They did not need to, because at last, on this harsh and wild land, they had found a true home. Dear friends, in a world filled with prejudice and violence, sometimes the kindness of one person is stronger than any gun. Elias did not save them out of pity, but because he believed every soul deserves a place to belong. It was that compassion that rekindled hope in three women who had once given up. Love does not arrive through promises, it grows in shared work, in hands that bring a land and hearts back to life. It has been a true pleasure sharing this story with you, the wonderful audience of Wild West storytelling. Wherever you are, I hope joy and peace find their way to your heart. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Tell me what you think about this story in the comments below. Hit 1 if you enjoyed it, and do not forget to subscribe channel for more dramatic tales from the Wild West. Jonas Holt was tightening a section of fence when he suddenly froze. Out there, on the dusty red road, a small figure was stumbling toward him. The boy looked about 8 years old. His skin was sun-darkened, his clothes were torn to shreds, and his bare feet were bleeding. When he saw Jonas, he collapsed to his knees and cried out into the wind, "Please, sir, help my mother. They are beating her. They are going to hang her. Please, sir." Jonas stood frozen. The boy's words ripped through the wind like a thunderclap. In front of him was just a scrawny Apache child, his dark eyes blazing with fear and desperation. Jonas looked around. The prairie was empty, no one else in sight. "Who is hurting your mother?" Jonas asked, his voice hoarse. The boy looked up, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. "The traffickers. They beat her and torture her before taking her across the border." A chill ran down Jonas's spine. He knew those people, men who hunted down native women and sold them across the border. The wind picked up, whipping dust into the sky. Jonas bent down, lifted the boy to his feet, and said firmly, "Show me the way." His horse let out a long whinny as he climbed into the saddle. On the horizon, red clouds gathered and spread across the sky, promising a violent night. Jonas knew he was stepping into something he had tried to avoid for many years. Jonas's horse galloped across the sun-scorched fields, dust billowing behind them in thick clouds. The boy sat in front of the saddle, his hands clutching the reins tightly, eyes brimming with tears as he stared toward the mountains. Just past that rocky ledge. The boy's voice trembled. Jonas gave a slight nod, his hand brushing over the Winchester rifle hanging by his side. As they drew closer, smoke and fire were already rising from the narrow canyon. Jonas pulled the horse to a halt and lowered his body. Down below, in a clearing strewn with broken rocks, the traffickers had gathered around a dead oak tree. In the center, an Apache woman was tied up, her hands bound, hanging halfway from a branch, her body bruised and streaked with dried blood. "That's my mother," the boy choked. Jonas squinted. There were 6 of them in total, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, laughing and joking as if it were all a game. He took a deep breath and slowly loaded his rifle. But instead of aiming at them, Jonas raised his weapon skyward and fired 2 deafening shots into the air. The blasts echoed off the canyon walls, bouncing back like the roar of an approaching army. The traffickers panicked instantly. "Border Patrol," one of them shouted. "Run!" They scrambled to grab their gear, fleeing in chaos. One of them tripped and left his rifle behind as he bolted for cover. Jonas waited a few seconds, then spurred his horse down into the canyon. He cut the ropes and eased the woman to the ground. She collapsed into his arms, breathing faintly, deep marks etched into her wrists where the rope had cut through. "Hold on to your mother," Jonas said quickly, lifting them both onto the horse. The 3 of them rode out of the canyon beneath a sky ablaze with the red glow of sunset. Behind them, the wind swept through glowing embers, carrying the scent of smoke and lingering fear. When they reached the open plains, Jonas glanced back at the hill now cloaked in smoke. The boy asked softly, "Mister, will they come back?" Jonas did not answer right away. He tightened the reins, his eyes fixed on the far-off horizon. "As long as I am breathing, they will never touch either of you again." A dry wind swept through, raising red dust into the air. 3 silhouettes, a lone rancher, an Apache mother, and a small child moved quietly across the prairie, glowing in the fiery light of dusk. They did not yet know that tonight would mark the beginning of a fateful journey. That night, the fog rolled in thick. Jonas's old cabin sat nestled in the middle of a dry grass field, its weathered wood walls flickering with the glow from the fireplace. The Apache woman lay on a makeshift bed Jonas had fashioned from several pieces of cowhide. Her long black hair fell across her bruised face. The boy sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly. Silent, Jonas quietly stirred a bowl of corn porridge and placed it nearby. He did not know what to say. There had not been a woman's voice in this cabin for many years. Only the sound of wind slipping through the cracks in the planks and the occasional snap of firewood breaking in the heat. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes. Deep black eyes, alert and guarded, like a wild animal still being hunted. "You are safe now," Jonas said gently. "No one is going to hurt you anymore." The woman looked around, her gaze landing on the rifle resting on the table. "Are you going to sell us to someone else?" Her voice was hoarse, broken. Jonas froze. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked over and opened the cabin door, revealing the vast darkness outside. "If you want to leave, you can. No one is stopping you," he said, his voice low but soft like the breeze. She looked out into the darkness, where white fog blanketed the desolate field. No torchlight, no path home. The boy looked up at her and whispered, "Mother." She tightened her grip on his hand, then turned her face away. Jonas understood she could not leave, at least not tonight. He added more wood to the fire, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and went to sit back down at the table. His back was quiet, solid, like a statue carved in silence. Outside, the wind whistled through the old fence, like a warning. Jonas glanced at the scar on his hand, thinking of the boy and his mother now inside this house. He still did not know who they were, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of pain, pride, and fear that made it impossible to turn away. As dawn approached, the woman still had not slept. She spoke softly, like a breath dissolving into the mist. "Thank you for saving us." Jonas looked up, but she had already turned her face away. Out on the porch, the wind kept blowing, carrying grains of sand against the wooden door, like the quiet heartbeat of spirits still searching for their way home. 3 days later, the June sun scorched the prairie like fire. Jonas hauled a wagon full of lumber into the town of Dry Hollow, a place with nothing more than a dusty main street, a handful of shops, and a noisy saloon. People looked at him differently. A man chewing on a toothpick muttered something from a porch and let out a sneer. Another man with a thick beard spat on the ground. "Heard you got a redskin holed up at your place, Holt." Jonas said nothing. He walked straight into the general store, traded for a sack of flour and some salt, then turned and left. But the stairs clung to his back like steel thorns. That afternoon, when he returned to the ranch, the Apache boy came running out, his face full of fear. "They're here," he said. Jonas stopped on the porch. 4 men on horseback stood several yards away, their eyes filled with contempt. The one in front, Merrick, a nearby ranch owner, spit out a wad of chewing tobacco and snapped, "We heard you're hiding a trafficker's slave. Hand her over. Let the law deal with it." Jonas calmly removed his gloves, his gaze cold as ice. "Whose law?" he asked. Merrick gave a dry laugh. "White man's law, Holt." Jonas stepped down the 3 wooden steps and stopped in the blazing Sunday. He laid a hand on his Winchester rifle, his voice low and steady like the wind. "Around here, no one owns anyone. If you want to test that, go ahead. Take one more step." The air thickened. The wind slipped through the dry fence, dragging sand along with it. After a moment, Merrick snorted and turned his horse. "You're a damn fool. You'll regret this." As they rode away, the boy looked up at Jonas, tears welling in his eyes. Naola stood in the doorway, half her body still wrapped in bandages, clutching a torn cloth. Jonas did not turn back. He just said quietly, "Do not be afraid. They are just trying to scare us." But inside, he knew better. Rumors in this land spread faster than wildfire in a hot wind. And sometimes, a single word could be enough to burn a life to the ground. That night, when Jonas set his rifle on the table, the firelight danced across his face, not just the face of a lonely rancher anymore, but of a man standing at the razor-thin line between humanity and danger. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of the old days, those dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit down together, and I will tell you another story from the West. At dawn, the wind blew in salty from the desert. Jonas stepped outside to fetch the horse, his eyes drifting instinctively across the ground near the cattle pen. Then he froze. A footprint. It was not his, and not the boy's. The print was deep, still damp with morning dew, leading toward the barn. Jonas crouched, lightly touching the ground with his fingertips. The sand had been disturbed less than an hour ago. His heart sank. He stood and looked into the distance. The fence was broken in one spot, and faint wheel tracks curved into the dirt, like a wagon had stopped and turned away. He knew right then, someone was watching them. Jonas stepped back inside the house and quietly slung the Winchester over his shoulder. Naola and the boy were at the hearth, preparing breakfast, the smell of cornmeal mixing with wood smoke. "Pack up what you need," Jonas said quietly, not turning his head. "If I tell you to run, go west. There's a stream. Near it, a rock cave. You can hide there." Naola paused, her eyes darkening. "They are really coming, aren't they?" "Not coming," he replied. "Already here." She pressed her lips together, saying nothing more. The boy quietly began to gather things, his small face set tight, too serious for someone his age. Jonas did not rest the entire day. He stuffed extra wood between the cracks in the walls, checked every bullet, refilled the oil lamps. As the sun began to sink, he led Naola and her son into the barn, where an old hatch led beneath the floor. "This door locks from the inside only," he instructed. "If you hear gunfire, do not come out. Not until daylight." She gripped his hand for the first time, firmly. "Jonas." Her voice trembled. "They are going to kill you." He looked into her eyes, the firelight reflecting in those deep, black pupils. "No," he said softly. "I promise. I will not let that happen." Outside, the wind began to howl. The sun dipped behind the hills, bringing with it a thick, heavy darkness. In that darkness, something was moving, the sound of horses, a soft chuckle, then silence. Jonas stepped onto the porch and cocked his rifle. His steel-gray eyes were cold as stone. Somewhere out there, the hunters were closing in, and he knew one wrong move, and everything would go up in flames. That night, the sky was black as ink. Wind howled through the brittle fence, carrying the scent of sand and smoke. Jonas sat in the dark, his back against the wall, both hands wrapped tightly around his Winchester. A small oil lamp cast flickering light across his face, deep lines etched in weathered skin, eyes heavy and cold as stone. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats, distant but steady and deliberate. Next came soft laughter, riding the wind. Jonas blew out the lamp and slowly stepped onto the porch. Moonlight filtered weakly through the wooden beams. At the edge of the ranch, a few torchlights flickered, then grew clearer. 7, maybe 8 men the traffickers had returned. And this time, they brought more. A rough voice rang out. "Jonas Holt, give us back our woman, and you get to live." Jonas said nothing. He stood still as a statue, his coat whipping in the wind. Another voice shouted, "You hear that, you crazy bastard? Why'd you save her? She's just property." Jonas spat into the dirt. His voice was low, thunderous. "There is no property here. Only people." The sound of rifles cocking echoed all at once. Jonas took aim at the nearest torch and fired. The gunshot cracked through the night. The flames snuffed out instantly. Curses erupted from the darkness as the men fired blindly toward the house. Bullets sliced through the air, sparking off the wooden walls. Jonas rolled to one side, reloading quickly. The wind kicked up clouds of sand, veiling the battlefield in a thick haze. Inside the house, Nayola held her son in the cellar, her hands trembling. "Is he going to make it?" the boy whispered. She said nothing, only gripped his hand tighter and listened to each shot echo above. Out in the yard, Jonas dropped 2 more. One bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing his shirt. Blood ran down, but he did not falter. He shifted position, ducked behind an old wagon, lined up a shot, and fired again. The last torch tumbled to the ground, its light dying. The traffickers panicked, lost in the dark, shouting, stumbling over one another. But then, from the distance, Jonas saw something. Other flames, brighter, closer, coming fast. He squinted. The sound of horses galloping echoed from the distant hills. Someone was coming. He gripped the rifle tighter, heart pounding, and muttered under his breath. They brought backup? Damn it. The wind howled in sharp bursts, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and charred ash. Jonas reloaded his rifle, his forehead slick with sweat and blood. He was bracing for the next round of gunfire, but instead, what he heard was the blast of a bugle from the base of the hill. A powerful, echoing sound rolling across the prairie. The traffickers froze. One of them shouted, "Border Patrol, fall back, fall back." Before they could even turn their horses, torchlight poured down the hillside like a flood. Over a dozen border cavalry charged forward, their uniforms coated in dust, rifles raised high. At the front rode Lieutenant Miles, a man whose life Jonas had once saved during an ambush. He bellowed, "Drop your weapons, hands in the air." Gunfire halted. All that remained was the sound of hooves and ragged breathing. A few stubborn men reached for their knives, but they were swiftly taken down with warning shots. Jonas staggered out from the shadows, his shoulders still bleeding. Miles galloped over, eyes wide with disbelief. "Good Lord, Holt. Did you try to get yourself killed again?" Jonas let out a dry laugh and dipped his head. There was no other way. From inside the house, Nayola stepped out holding her child, her face streaked with tears and soot. She looked around. Torchlight, smoke, bodies on the ground, then looked at Jonas. Her eyes held gratitude and pain. She whispered, "Thank God you are still alive." Jonas opened his mouth to speak, but Miles cut in. "We'll take these men back to the station. You need that shoulder stitched up and some rest. As for her and the boy, can they stay here with you?" Jonas nodded slowly, his voice gravelly and soft. "This is their home now." A strong gust of wind swept through, scattering embers into the air like fireflies. The soldiers moved about, tying up the prisoners, their horses neighing across the wide prairie. On the cold earth, Jonas collapsed onto the porch steps, sitting in silence as the first light of dawn rose on the horizon. Nayola came over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Her hands were sun-worn and rough, but when they touched, it was like the breeze itself. "Thank you," she said, voice raw and quiet. Jonas looked up at her, his eyes catching the golden glow of sunrise. "No thanks needed. Just do not leave again." The little boy, cradled in his mother's arms, spoke softly. "Mr. Holt, you are the best person I have ever known." Jonas smiled, so faintly no one even heard it. He turned toward the rising sun, as the morning light spilled across the porch. chasing away the scent of smoke and blood from the night before. And in that first brightness after the firestorm, they all understood a home had been rebuilt, not with wood, but with trust and love. A week after the standoff, spring finally arrived. Light rain fell over the prairie, washing away the red dust that had clung to the land through the long dry season. At the foot of the hills, Jonas Holt's old cabin stood silent. But now, thin curls of smoke rose gently from the chimney, fragile, yet warm. Inside the small wooden kitchen, Naola stirred a pot of soup on the stove. The golden firelight lit up her face, no longer marked by fear or exhaustion, but by a rare peace. The boy sat nearby, carefully drying Jonas's saddle with an old cloth, a task he never would have dreamed of doing just days ago. The door swung open. Jonas stepped inside, his coat damp from the rain, the scent of wet grass drifting in with him. He set down his axe, brushed the mud off his boots, and looked around. The light, the sound of a child, the smell of hot soup, it all came together, like a dream he once thought had died with his late wife. "This house has never been this quiet," he said softly, his voice deep and warm. Naola turned and smiled. "That's because now, there's life in it." A simple sentence, but it struck Jonas deep in his chest. He looked at her, then at the boy. The emptiness he had carried for so many years was finally filled with something he never expected: a family. That afternoon, once the rain had cleared, the three of them went out to build a new fence. Jonas showed the boy how to drive stakes into the ground, how to tie the ropes just right, while Naola brought them water and smiled a rare smile, but so real it made even the wind pause. As sunset spread gold across the land, they sat on the porch, saying nothing, just listening to the crickets and the scent of fresh grass after rain. Jonas gently wrapped his arm around Naola's shoulders, placing his hand over hers. "From now on, no one will ever scare you again," he whispered. Naola leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes shimmering in the light. "You saved me and my son from death. But more than that, you saved me from the darkness inside myself." The boy, dozing off beside her, rested his head on her knee. Jonas looked at them both, and the steel in his gray eyes softened. "Maybe," he said, "I was saved too." The sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving streaks of pink and red across the vast prairie. In that moment, the old cabin was no longer a place of loneliness, but a home for three souls once battered by fate, now finding each other beneath the endless sky. Love does not arrive with grand promises. It grows quietly, in the smallest of acts: a bowl of soup, a roof overhead, a hand holding another hand. And out here, on this harsh land, they proved a simple, powerful truth: that love is the only thing strong enough to heal even the wounds we cannot see. My friend, out here in this dry and unforgiving land, sometimes happiness is nothing more than a small house, a hot pot of soup, and three people who choose to lean on each other. Jonas once believed his life ended with loss, but then a fragile hand reached for his, and he understood. Happiness is not about forgetting the past, but having someone to walk through it with. As the wind whispered and the fire-colored sunset burned the sky, he smiled. Even in the harshest soil, love still finds a way to grow. It has been an honor to share this journey with you, dear viewers of Wild West Storytelling. I truly hope you live a life of peace and joy. I love you all. Tell me what you thought of this story. Leave a comment down below. Type Enna if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. The wind swept across the dry prairie, carrying with it the scent of red dust and the creaking sound of a rope. In front of the massive wooden gates of Calder Reed's ranch, a woman hung suspended, bare feet straining to touch the ground, her neck pulled tight by a coarse rope. Sana, the second wife. Apache blood ran through her veins, and there was a fire in her eyes that refused to die. Calder Reed stood on the porch, the brim of his cowboy hat casting a shadow over half of his cold, expressionless face. A man who had long treated her suffering like some twisted form of entertainment. His henchman's cruel laughter echoed, then faded into the wind. Only the dry, rasping groans of the rope remained, mixed with the faint gasps of a woman teetering on the edge of death. From afar, along the red dirt road, Jonas Hale, owner of a lonely ranch, pulled his horse to a stop. He stared at the body swaying in the wind, sunlight glinting off his weather-worn face. Jonas walked forward and drew his knife. He cut the rope. Her body collapsed into his arms, heavy, limp, but still warm. She opened her eyes. Her lips were cracked, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, get me out of here. He is a demon in human skin." Jonas looked at her, his eyes cold and sad like old steel. He said nothing. He gently lifted her onto the saddle, then turned and walked away. Behind them, the wind rose again, carrying the demonic laughter echoing from the depths of Hell Creek Ranch. Sana woke up inside a small wooden cabin, dim light slipping through the cracks in the door, casting shadows over the bruises on her neck and shoulders. The faint scent of dry tobacco and bitter coffee lingered in the air. In the corner of the room, the man whose name she still did not know was tending a fire, every movement slow and deliberate. She startled, tried to sit up, then collapsed from the pain in her neck. Jonas Hale turned around. He said nothing, just poured a glass of water and placed it on the table. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse and trembling. "Owner of the ranch out west," he answered. "You almost died." Sana lowered her head. The rope, Calder's cold eyes, the laughter of those men, it all came flooding back. Her trembling hands clenched into fists. 3 years ago, she had been the daughter of a minor Apache chief. When the soldiers swept through her ancestral land, the entire tribe was wiped out. The survivors were sold off like merchandise. One night, she was dragged in front of Calder Reed, a white man with a voice sharp as a knife. He said, "I need a second wife. A bit of red blood will make me look more powerful." And from that moment, Sana's life became a living hell. At first, he gave her pretty dresses, good food, whispered sweet words. But when she refused to bow, his eyes turned into blades. He beat her, chained her inside the stables, forced her to kneel in the courtyard, made her serve liquor to drunk, jeering men. Then one night, she fought back, threw a cup of whiskey in his face, and the next morning, he hung her at the front gate for the whole town to see her betrayal. Inside Jonas's small cabin, Sana looked out the window. The sunlight poured over the prairie outside, golden light mixing with red dust. She whispered, "Why did you save me?" Jonas was silent for a long moment. His steel-gray eyes stared off into the distance. His voice was low and rough. "Because I once had someone who was treated the same way, and I was too late." Sana asked no more. She turned away, and a dry tear slipped onto her calloused hand. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, carrying the creak of the old wooden door. Hell Creek remained silent, but inside that weathered little cabin, two people shared the same wound, and the first spark of life had begun to flicker in the heart of the dead land. The first morning in Jonas Hale's cabin was cold like needles against the skin. Light filtered through the cracks in the wall, landing on Sana's neck right where the rope had once left a deep purple bruise. She jolted awake, clutching her collar, eyes scanning the unfamiliar room. In the corner, the man was tending the fire again. The glow of the embers lit up his sun-weathered face, still and silent as stone. "Who are you?" Her voice was dry and hoarse. "Just someone passing through," he said shortly. She looked at his hands, calloused, darkened by sun, but steady. Not like the others she had known. Jonas set a cup of water on the table, then turned and walked out. No questions, no glance back. The day passed in silence. Sana sat on the bed, listening to the steady rhythm of a hammer striking out back. Each strike like a heartbeat, slow, heavy, certain. Sometimes she looked out the window and saw Jonas repairing the fence, his horse tied by the well, golden dust blowing in the wind. This place had no shouting, no cracking whips, only the wind, and a quiet man. Late in the afternoon, Jonas returned, sweat soaking through his shirt, and placed a pot of soup on the table. "Eat." Sana lifted the spoon to her lips. The taste was salty, a bit burnt, but warm. She whispered, "Aren't you afraid? What if he comes looking?" Jonas did not look up. "Of course I am. But what I fear more is standing by and doing nothing when I see injustice." Outside, the wind struck the wooden walls, kitchen smoke drifting through the narrow cabin. Sana looked at the man before her. Rough, solitary, and so quiet it was almost unsettling. But in his eyes, there was no ownership, only a deep, old sorrow. That night, Sana could not sleep. She stared out the window, where Jonas sat motionless, his rifle resting across his lap. In the firelight, he looked like a stone statue guarding the doorway for a soul just returned from the dead. For the first time in years, she felt safe not because of thick walls or strong locks, but because someone was willing to stand through the night and not walk away. Calder Reed slammed his glass down on the table. The glass shattered, red liquor bleeding across the old, stained map like spilled blood. The rope was cut, he growled. That woman is still alive. In the dark corner, Willard Pike tipped his hat, his eyes narrow like a water snake. My men spotted a strange horse trail out west. Might be the rancher Hale. Calder let out a harsh, broken laugh, dry and nearly insane. He is going to pay for touching what is mine. That afternoon, the sound of hooves echoed through Hell Creek. People shut their doors tight and peeked through curtains. They knew when Calder Reed made a move, blood would follow. Out at the small ranch to the west, Jonas Hale stood by the fence, looking out. The sun was setting, turning the field of yellow grass into a sea of fire. Sana stepped up behind him, a water jug in her hands. "What do you see out there?" she asked. "Just the wind," he said. "But the wind feels different today." She stayed quiet. In her chest, the old Apache instinct stirred. A storm from hell was drawing near. Jonas went inside and laid his Winchester rifle on the table, checking each bullet. Sana watched him and asked softly, "If he comes, what will you do?" Jonas paused. The silence stretched. "I do not know," he said, "but I will not let him take anyone else." Night fell fast. The dry wind whipped through the trees. Sana lit the stove, golden firelight flickering across the scars on her neck. Every time the flames jumped, memories surged back: the rope, the laughter, the shame. Her hands clenched the edge of the table as she struggled to breathe. Jonas stepped up and laid a hand on her shoulder. "You survived," he said slowly. "Now you just need to learn how to stand." Outside, in the dark, 4 of Calder's riders crossed the dry creek bed. Wagon wheels rolled over gravel. Chains clinked with the wind. On the porch, Jonas snuffed out the lamp, leaving only the firelight from the kitchen. "They will be here in a few days," he said. "Maybe sooner." Sana did not back down. She looked at him, eyes bright in the fire's glow. "Then I will not run this time." Jonas turned to her and stared for a long moment in her black eyes. There was no fear left, only the will to live. "All right," he said. "Then we wait." The wind swept across the prairie, lifting dust into little spirals. In Hell Creek, the night was beginning, and with it, the hunt. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of red dirt afternoons and the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, subscribe to my channel, so that every day, we can sit together again. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West. The next morning, the sky over Hell Creek burned a deep bronze. Not a single cloud in sight. Only the sharp clang of metal against wood. Jonas Hale was teaching Sana how to shoot. "Keep your arms straight," he said. "Do not be afraid of the sound. It is just loud, not painful." Sana pressed her lips together. Her hands trembled slightly, sweat soaking through the bandage on her neck. Jonas stood behind her, placing his hand on her forearm to steady it. "Try," he said gently. The shot tore through the silence. A bird in the distance flapped into the sky, startled. The bullet grazed the edge of the wooden target, leaving a thin tear like a breath. Sana flinched, then looked up at him. In her deep black eyes, for the first time, a spark of light appeared. "Again," she said. Jonas nodded. The second shot hit the target straight through the heart. The sound echoed off the rocks like thunder, like a warning of what was coming. That afternoon, hot winds blew in from the south. Jonas split firewood while Sana tended the stove. The scent of burning wood mixed with dust and sweat. They did not speak much, just worked, each movement solid, sure, as if they had lived together for years. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Sana sat on the porch, gazing out over the fields. Firelight flickered in her eyes. "I used to think, if I killed him, I would be free," she said softly. Jonas set his cup down. His voice was low and rough. "Do not choose that path. There are many ways to find freedom." She fell silent. His words struck deep like the first shovel breaking into buried pain. After a while, she smiled not with joy, but with a quiet realization. Then I will learn how to live again, she said. Jonas nodded, holding her gaze. And I will be here when you do. Night fell. The fire in the stove roared. Sana sat mending his shirt, the needle and thread glinting in the firelight. Jonas leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, but his hand still resting on the rifle. Outside, the wind howled across the empty plains. The first dust storm of the dry season swept over Hell Creek. Red sand crept in through every crack in the cabin, settling across the floor, and within that dust, two people sat in silence, but no longer in fear. In that old cabin, the fire burned brighter than ever. Night fell over Hell Creek like a heavy blanket of ash and dust. Only the wind moved, carrying the scent of old rain buried deep in the soil. Jonas Hale sat on the porch, his Winchester rifle resting across his knees. Beside him, Sana knelt by the window, firelight flickering across her sun-darkened face and those deep, black eyes. I hear something, she whispered. Jonas nodded slightly. Horses. 4. No, 5. The wind shifted. A faint scent of gunpowder drifted through the air. In the distance, torchlight flickered along the trail. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer until they stopped just outside the wooden gate. Calder Reed's voice rang out rough, arrogant. Jonas Hale, I know you are hiding my wife in there. Hand her over, and I might let you live. Jonas said nothing. He stood, cocked the rifle. The metallic click echoed in the stillness like a warning. Sana looked at him, her breath quick and shallow. No, he said softly. No one hands their soul to the devil. The first shot cracked through the air. The bullet tore through the window and slammed into a wooden post. Jonas fired back instantly, a deafening blast lighting up the room. Outside, one man fell from his horse and hit the ground. The others charged in like rabid dogs. Gun smoke filled the house. Dust and ash rose into the air. Sana crouched behind the table, hands trembling, but her eyes never left the sights. Shoot when you see the flash from their muzzles, Jonas called out. She took a breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot ripped through the dark, then a scream echoed on the porch. Sana gasped for breath, her hands still shaking, but her eyes had changed. She was no longer the one running. The chaos lasted all night. The roof was pierced. Black smoke curled through the rafters. Jonas took a bullet to the shoulder, but stayed standing. He pulled Sana into the corner and reloaded. Stay calm, he said. They are almost out of ammunition. Calder roared into the darkness. That woman belongs to me. I fed her, I hung her, and I will bury her. Jonas shouted back, his voice raw and cracked. No one belongs to you, Calder. No one. The final gunshot rang out, then silence. Only the fire still blazed in the yard, and horses fled into the wind. Ash and dust swirled through the broken window frame. In the dim golden light, Sana knelt, still holding the rifle. She looked at Jonas, blood trickling from his shoulder, his breath heavy, but his eyes still sharp as steel. They will come back, she whispered. Jonas nodded. And when they do, we will not run. The sky had not yet turned to light. Thick fog blanketed Hell Creek. The wind carried the scent of burned wood and old blood. Jonas Hale tightened the bandage on his shoulder, his other hand gripping the Winchester rifle. Sana stood by the door, her hair loose, face streaked with ash, her black eyes deep as a canyon. The sound of hooves returned. Not many this time, just 3. In the middle rode Calder Reed, draped in a black coat, his face hardened by hate. Jonas Hale, he shouted. You think you can hide her from me forever? Jonas stepped off the porch, rifle lowered, his voice deep like desert wind. No one is hiding anyone. Calder drew first. The shot cracked, the bullet grazing Jonas and slamming into the wooden post. Jonas did not flinch. He fired back. A flash lit the morning fog. Calder's horse bucked, throwing him hard into the red dirt. He hit the ground and skidded through the dust. Sana rushed out, grabbing the pistol that had fallen nearby. Calder rose, eyes bloodshot, reaching for the weapon at his belt. Don't! Jonas shouted, but it was too late. Sana was already aiming at his chest, her hand trembling. Calder laughed, a ragged, twisted sound caught in the wind. Do it, you savage. Show me what you learned from being my wife. A heavy silence followed. Only the wind whispered through the charred rope hanging on the fence. Then Sana lowered the gun. Her voice was quiet, but each word dropped like stone. No, I am nothing like you anymore. Jonas stepped forward, ripped the weapon from Calder's grip, and punched him once, twice until silence. He tied Calder up with the very rope he had once used to hang others. "The law in Hell Creek has been quiet long enough," Jonas said, voice rough. Today, it speaks again. By morning, the townsfolk gathered in the square. They had never seen anything like it. Calder Reed, the man who once ruled by blood, now handcuffed, head bowed. Jonas rode on horseback. Santa walked beside him. Red dust swirled behind them like smoke. At the old stone jail, Jonas stopped. The iron door clanged shut behind Calder. The sound of the lock echoed cold through the air. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Now he will face justice." Santa looked through the bars. Her eyes held no hatred anymore, only the peace of someone who had reclaimed her soul. She turned to Jonas and said softly, "It's done." He nodded, his eyes looking out toward the rising sun over the prairie. The first sun after the dust storm rose over the Hell Creek prairie. Light slid across scorched grass, reflecting off old wooden rooftops. Smoke from the night's fire still hung in the air, but the scent of fear was gone, replaced by the warm smell of earth, as if the land itself was learning to breathe again. Jonas Hale sat on the front steps of the ranch, shoulders still bandaged, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He gazed out at the fields, the well, a few cattle lazily crossing by, all quiet in a way that felt strange. Inside the house, Santa folded the last blanket and stepped onto the porch. The morning breeze lifted her black hair, and sunlight touched the old scars on her neck, now just faded traces of a life she no longer lived. Jonas looked up. "Are you going to leave?" Santa was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "I used to think I had to leave, to find the place I belonged. But maybe that place is here." He did not answer, only looked at her, his eyes saying all the words that did not need to be spoken. Together, they turned toward the prairie, where the sun was rising bright over the horizon. That afternoon, the people of Hell Creek gathered in the town square. News of Calder Reed's sentencing had spread quickly. There were no cheers, no curses, only silence. A kind of justice this land had forgotten for far too long. An old woman selling pastries smiled as she saw Jonas ride past with the Apache woman beside him. "He saved her," someone said. She replied, "No. They saved each other." Evening came. A warm wind swept across the fields. Santa hung fresh laundry behind the house, a new cotton dress fluttering in the sunday. Jonas was fixing the fence, his gray hair catching a glint of silver. They did not need many words, just the quiet presence of one another, peaceful and whole in a way words could never describe. As the sun set, they sat together on the porch. Santa leaned against a wooden post, a cup of coffee in her hand. Jonas looked over and asked gently, "Are you still afraid?" She shook her head, smiled faintly. "No, because for the first time in my life, I do not have to run." Night settled in. The fields of Hell Creek lay still beneath a golden moon. Crickets sang. The wind whispered across the rooftop. Inside, the fire in the stove glowed warm, casting the shadows of two people sitting close, quiet and safe. Dear friends, in this red-dusted land, there are ordinary people who choose to rise when everyone else bows their heads. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is when the heart trembles, but the hands still hold steady, and the feet keep walking toward what is right. Because out here in the West, justice does not always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from the eyes of someone brave enough to face evil and not look away. Jonas Hale did not kill Calder Reed. Santa refused to let hatred define her life. And in the moment they chose forgiveness, Hell Creek regained something it had long lost, the belief that people can still be good, no matter how cruel the world becomes. There are battles that require no blood, only a heart that still believes in what is right. And above all else, I always wish you strength and happiness, no matter where you are. I love you, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if this story moved you. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. The sound of whip cracking against skin echoed, sharp and dry. Sana collapsed to her knees, her wrists tied tightly with rough rope, blood seeping down in long streaks onto the ground. Bruises spread across her shoulders and back, everywhere was smeared with blood and dust. Each time she raised her head, The sunlight seemed to rip through her already burning eyes. In front of her stood Harlan, the man who once stepped into her mother's life with sweet promises, now panting as he held a whip. "That land belongs to me. Do you hear me? Sign it, Sana. Sign it and I will let you go." She struggled to catch her breath, her voice broken. "That land belongs to my mother." The next strike landed like steel. Sana screamed hoarsely. Her body crumpled, but her eyes refused to yield. Harlan threw the paper down into the sand, his voice dripping with venom. "Not signing? Fine. Let the sun do the rest." He let out a dry laugh, mounted his horse, and rode off. As his figure disappeared behind the dust, all that remained was the sound of the wind and the ragged breath of the abandoned Apache girl. Sana's skin burned. Her throat was dry as ash. Every breath felt like a knife. She looked up at the sky, her cracked lips trembling. "Mother, if you can see me, I know you would never forgive him." A distant sound of hoofbeats echoed. Elias Holt, a lone rancher, pulled his horse to a stop, eyes squinting through the dust. He saw the body tied to the fence, and in that moment, something inside him stirred. He dismounted, drew his knife, and cut the ropes to free her. Elias clenched his jaw and lifted her onto his horse. The sun was still scorching, but now there was someone carrying her away from that hell. The evening wind swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of burning dry grass. Elias urged his horse forward, each stride heavy and steady. On the saddle, Sana lay motionless, her wrists raw from rope burns and her collar soaked in blood. Her black hair clung to her shoulders, swaying slightly with the horse's movement. When they reached the cabin, Elias gently laid her on the wooden bed, then fetched rainwater from a barrel and began cleaning each wound. Every time the damp cloth touched her scorched skin, Sana let out a faint moan. Her eyelids fluttered, but she did not wake. The lamplight cast shadows across Elias's face, a sun-hardened face with sharp bones and steel-gray eyes that looked worn and weathered. He paused, staring at the rope marks on her wrists so deep the flesh had split, with grains of sand still trapped in the blood. His jaw tightened. That familiar feeling surged blood, burnt skin, and helplessness. He had once carried a woman just like this, his wife, who had died in a fire set by raiders during an attack on their ranch. Since then, Elias Holt had lived like a shadow, a wooden cabin, a Winchester rifle, and fields no one visited. Night fell. Desert winds howled against the walls. Elias sat on the porch, leaning against a post, staring up at the sky. Inside, Sana breathed faintly, her skin still flushed and red. He listened to that breath, weak but steady, like the only sound left to believe in across this barren land. The next morning, as the first light crept through the window, she stirred awake. Her whole body trembled, and her eyes instantly sharpened with the guarded look of a cornered animal. Elias did not move closer. He simply spoke, voice low and dry. "Do not be afraid. You are safe now." She looked around the small room, the scent of wood and ash, the window opening to a field of open land. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "Just someone who lives nearby. Are you going to turn me over to him?" Elias turned away, silent for a moment. "If that was my plan, you would not be lying here." In that moment, light fell across the face of the Apache girl dusted with sand and dried blood. But in her deep dark eyes was something that was both afraid and defiant. Elias looked at her for a long time, then spoke quietly, almost like a vow. "Get some rest. No one is going to touch you again." He stepped outside and closed the door gently. His figure melted into the silver-gray horizon of this dry land, where a man who once lost everything might have, for the first time in years, just started to feel his heart beat again. On the second morning after being rescued, Sana woke up in the small room, filled with the scent of burnt wood and pine resin. Strips of early sunlight streamed through the window, casting light across the rough bandage wrapped around her arm. The pain made her wince, but for the first time, after so many days, there were no whips. No cruel laughter, just the slow, warm rhythm of a horse's hooves tapping outside. On the wooden table sat a bowl of water and a piece of cold bread. On the floor, a pair of dust-covered boots rested neatly by the door the man had gone out. She touched her wrist, where the rope burn still showed red. A sharp twinge brought the memories flooding back, the screams, the lashes, the stench of sunburned flesh. She trembled, curled into herself, and began to cry in silence. When the door opened, Sunlight rushed in, carrying with it the scent of dry prairie wind. Elias stepped inside, holding a bucket of water and an old cloth. He paused for a moment when he saw her looking at him like she was ready to flee. "I will not hurt you," he said quietly, setting the bucket down. "You need to drink." She looked at him, his sun-worn face, those quiet gray eyes like stone, then reached for the cup and drank in small sips. The water spilled over her lips, warming her dry throat. After that, many days passed. Elias spoke little, but he left food and water every day. Sana began walking around the cabin, exploring. She found a rusted ammo rack, a guitar blanketed in dust, and an old photo frame on the table, a woman with a child. She asked softly, "Is this your wife?" Elias stopped what he was doing, falling silent for a long moment. "Yes, they are at peace now." The air turned still. Sana did not ask anything else. That evening, she rekindled the fire and made soup with the last of the vegetables. Elias said nothing, only watched, but his eyes softened. That night, as he carried his blanket to the porch, she asked quietly, still cautious, "Why did you save me?" "Because I could not watch another human being be tortured like that." A long silence followed. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "Men like you are rare." Elias did not respond. He just looked out at the field, where the moonlight drifted across a layer of golden dust, and in the room behind him, the crackling fire reflected in the deep dark eyes of the Apache girl, where fear still lingered. But a flicker of trust had begun to appear. By midday, the desert wind had risen, whipping red dust around the newly built fence posts. The sound of hoofbeats echoed in the distance, heavy and steady, the kind of sound anyone who had lived near the frontier could recognize instantly. Danger was coming. Elias Holt was splitting firewood behind the horse barn. He stopped, squinting toward the trail. 3 riders emerged from the dust. Harlan in front, his black coat flaring in the wind. 2 gunmen riding behind him. Inside the house, Sana jolted, dropping a cup of water. Fear surged back, the old, bone-deep kind. Her heart pounded like it would burst. Elias stepped onto the porch, Winchester rifle in hand. Harlan pulled his horse to a halt at the gate, a crooked smile spreading beneath his speckled gray beard. "I heard you have been keeping something of mine, Holt." Elias stood tall, the sunlight glinting off his cold gray eyes. "She is not a thing." Harlan snorted, dropped his cigarette to the dirt, and crushed it beneath his boot. "She is Helen's girl. Her mother promised me that land. Now the girl holds it, so I came to collect." The words cut through the air like a blade. Sana stepped into the doorway, her hand trembling but her dark eyes burned with fury. "My mother never promised you anything." Harlan turned, smiling the way a man might after killing without regret. "You think she didn't? I knew her better than you ever did." He took a step forward, eyes like a coiled snake. "If she will not sign, I will burn this house just like I burned Helen's ranch." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, voice low and steady. "Try it." The air froze. Wind lashed the dust against their coats. Harlan's men gripped the handles of their Colts. Elias slowly raised the Winchester, the rifle old but steady in his hands. A moment, drawn tight like a wire. Harlan let out a short laugh, tugged at his reins. "No matter. Let us see how long you can keep her." He turned his horse, dust exploding beneath hooves, leaving behind the smell of tobacco smoke and a threat that hung in the air like a blade. Elias lowered the rifle, eyes still fixed ahead. Behind him, Sana stepped onto the porch, lips pressed tight, breath uneven. "He will come back," she said hoarsely. "I know," Elias replied. "But next time, I will be waiting." The wind carried his words, sweeping up dust and the sound of insects into the blazing noon. The prairie was silent, but the audience could feel the storm coming. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of the old days of dusty afternoons and the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your heart, please subscribe to my channel. So every day, we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another story from the Wild West. The desert night was deathly still. Wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying sand and the leftover heat of the day. Inside the small cabin, the flickering oil lamp cast a dim light over Sana's face, her deep black eyes reflecting the firelight. She sat close to the stove, her voice hoarse and trembling. "He did not come because of feelings, Elias. He came for the land." My mother had the most fertile land in this region, the only one with a deep well. Everyone wanted it, and he knew that. She paused, fingers tightening around the hem of her shirt. After my father died, my mother stood alone fighting drought, fighting land buyers, and fighting those who mocked her for being Apache. Then he showed up. He brought water, helped mend fences, said kind things to gain her trust. Sana looked down at the fire, her voice dropping. They ate together, worked together, and then he stayed. He said he wanted to help her keep the land, but the truth was, he wanted to take it. Elias watched her, his gray eyes darkening. What happened next? She looked up, her breath heavy. One afternoon, I went to the stream. When I came back, the house was on fire. My mother was still inside. I ran in, but the flames were too strong. When it was over, the sheriff called it a cooking accident. But I saw the hoof prints outside, the kind only he used. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her skin. I asked him. He looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, "This land is not going to sit empty forever." Her voice cracked. A few weeks later he came back, said my mother had passed the deed on to me, and demanded I sign it over. When I refused, he beat me, tied me to the fence, and left me under the sundae. He said, "If you die, the land will naturally belong to someone who knows how to keep it." Elias was silent. His shadow stretched long across the wall, his eyes cold as forged steel. "And you let the sun decide." Sana nodded slightly, tears sliding down her sunburnt cheeks. "I would rather die than hand that land over to him. But then you came." There was a pause. The oil lamp flickered wildly, then steadied again. Elias looked at her for a long time, his voice low and gravelly. Every word weighted. "He will not take anything else. That land belongs to you and to your mother. If you want to keep it, I will stand with you." Sana looked up, her eyes still wet. In her gaze was gratitude, confusion, and the quiet fear of a fragile trust just beginning to grow. Outside, the desert wind still howled, but inside that small wooden house, for the first time, something close to peace had begun to settle. By midday the next day, the air over the prairie was heavy as lead. A flock of crows circled above, cawing with hoarse cries. Waves of hot wind swept through, carrying red dust that coated the fence line. Elias Holt was checking the rounds in his Winchester when he heard the sound of hoofbeats. He did not need to look, he knew. He was coming. 3 figures emerged from the hazy dust. Harlan in the center, 2 gunmen flanking him, revolvers already strapped at their hips. Elias slung the rifle over his shoulder and stepped onto the porch. The sunlight was blinding white, sweat tracing a line down his neck. He stood tall, his shadow stretching long across the sand. Harlan pulled his horse to a stop at the gate, that familiar half-smile curling on his lips. "Well, look at that. The Western hero himself. What are you keeping that girl for, Holt? You really think you can save her from me?" Elias did not answer. He just spoke slowly, his voice rough like gravel. "Are you here to talk, or to die?" Silence hung for a breath. The wind whispered through the prairie. Harlan spat into the dirt and stepped down from his horse. "I came to take back what is mine. The girl, and her land." The cabin door burst open. Sana stepped out, fists clenched, old wounds still visible. "That land does not belong to you," she shouted, voice sharp as wind through canyon. "My mother died because of you. I am not afraid anymore." Harlan turned, his eyes darkening. "What do you know about fear, you little brat? I gave your mother everything, but she was stupid. Just like you." The click of a Winchester echoed through the stillness. Elias spoke, his voice low, like thunder before a storm. "That is enough." 3 seconds of silence. Then gunfire. Smoke exploded. One of Harlan's gunmen dropped, sand flaring like a dust storm. Shots rang out, echoing off the hills. Elias dove behind a crate and returned fire. A bullet tore through his shoulder, staining his shirt with blood. Sana screamed, grabbed the Colt on the table, stepped outside, and fired twice. The shots cracked sharp. The second gunman hit the ground. Harlan shouted, raising his gun, but Elias was already on his feet, rifle aimed straight at the man's chest. "Nowhere left to run, Briggs." The man backed away, breathing hard, sweat and dust mixing on his face. "You will not shoot me, Holt. You are a soldier. You fear guilt." Elias tightened his grip, rifle steady. I do not fear, but she deserves to see justice, not blood. He swung the rifle, the wooden stock slamming into Harlan's face. The man collapsed, blood mixing with sand. Elias bound his hands with the same coarse rope that had once tied Sana. Sana stepped forward, her eyes blazing at the man who had killed her mother. This land does not belong to you, and it never will. The wind rose, swirling red dust around them. Elias stood beside Sana, gazing toward the horizon, where the sun poured down like molten steel. The fight was over, but something in their eyes had changed forever. The evening fell slowly, the sky turning the color of deep bronze. The scent of gunpowder still lingered on the wind. Harlan lay collapsed in the yard, hands tightly bound, blood soaking into the red dust. The sound of hoofbeats echoed again. 3 riders approached Sheriff Colton and 2 ranchers beside him. The sheriff's face tightened as he took in the scene. Elias standing tall, blood soaking through the shoulder of his shirt, and Sana standing still, her black hair tossed by the wind, damp with sweat and dust. "What happened here, Holt?" the sheriff asked, his voice low and weary. Elias answered plainly, each word solid and firm. "I only did what he forced me to do." The sheriff knelt down, examining Harlan. The man was still conscious, grinning with a rasp, blood at the corner of his mouth. "I was ambushed. They tried to steal my land." Before he could say more, Sana stepped forward. Her eyes were dark as midnight, her voice hoarse but steady. "No one stole anything from you. This land belonged to my mother. I have the deed signed when I was 16. She pulled out an old folded paper, edges scorched, ink faded by smoke. Elias had found it in an old trunk, the only thing that had survived the fire all those years ago. The sheriff unfolded it, read carefully. Then he looked up at Elias, at Sana, and finally at Harlan. His eyes were cold as steel. "That is enough, Briggs. You are under arrest for attempted murder and unlawful seizure of property." The 2 ranchers grabbed Harlan and pulled him to his feet. He kicked, shouted, his voice raw. "This is my land. I gave everything for it. And you, Holt, you are just a washed-up failure holding land for a filthy savage." Elias said nothing. He simply stared, eyes gray and unwavering. Then he spoke quietly. "No, I am just keeping a promise and delivering justice." The sheriff tipped his hat to Elias, then led the group away. As the dust from the horses faded, the prairie fell silent once more. Sana stood still, fists clenched, eyes glistening under the golden light of sunset. "You saved me, Elias. But more than that, you brought back something I had lost my will to live." He stepped closer, slowly placing his calloused hand on her shoulder. "No one should die because of another man's greed, Sana. You and this land both deserve to live." The evening breeze swept past. The last light of day fell on the 2 of them upon wounds still bleeding, upon the deep black eyes of the Apache girl, and on the solemn face of the man who had known too much loss. All was silent, save for the wind whistling through the fence posts like the sigh of a mother long gone, finally able to rest. The first rain came in the afternoon. Each drop landed with a soft patter on the old tin roof, then turned into a downpour, washing away the red dust that had clung through the long drought. The air, once thick with gunfire and tension, now felt as light as a new breath. Elias Holt stood on the porch, looking out over the field. Where there had once been blood and rope, young grass now sprouted. The broken fence had been rebuilt. The horse stable had a new roof. In the rain, the smell of wet earth rose sharp and rich, the scent of life he had once believed he would never breathe again. Inside the cabin, Sana lit a fire. The flickering flames danced across her sun-kissed face, casting light over the faint scars on her shoulders and wrists. But now, those marks were no longer symbols of pain, they were proof that she had survived. She brought Elias a cup of hot coffee, steam curling into the mist of rain. "The rain is back," she said softly, her first smile gently forming at the corner of her lips. Elias nodded, his voice deep and warm. "Yes, and this land is grateful for you." They sat together on the porch steps, the rain soaking into their sleeves. The sound of rain and wind blended into one soft, steady, the kind of sound every lonely soul longs for. In the distance, a few riders passed by on horseback. They tipped their hats in greeting. There was no longer fear or disdain in their eyes, only quiet respect. Sana watched them go, her eyes glinting with a rare kind of hope. "Do you think They will accept me? They will, Elias said without hesitation. One day, they will see you as part of this land. The rain fell harder. Water soaked through to her skin, darkening her thick black hair until it shimmered under the silver sky. Elias looked at her, and in that moment, he saw the spirit of his late wife. Not in Sana's face, but in the gentle strength of a woman who had learned to rise after loss. She looked back at him and whispered, "I am still afraid. But at least now, I know I am not alone." Elias smiled, answering slowly, "No one has to live alone forever, Sana." The rain began to ease. Across the prairie, the clouds parted just enough to reveal a golden sunset glowing behind the storm. Two silhouettes sat close together, quietly watching the wet fields gleam like glass. This land once took everything from me, but in the end, it gave me back the one thing I needed most, a reason to stay. My friend, in this land where wind and sand never stop, two souls thought long dried up found each other again. Not through blood or hatred, but through trust. Love in the West does not come with flowers or sweet words. It comes like the first rain of the season, washing away the pain, watering the heart's thought turned to stone. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stay, for the land to bloom again. It has been a true joy to share this story with all of you. It is my honor and my privilege. I truly hope you all live happy, healthy lives. I love each and every one of you, my beloved audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you think of this story. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 1 if you liked it. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling